Is Wednesday, October 24th. The time is now 4:04, and we'll start with roll call. Signify if you're present. Mark Nelson.
Here.
Steve Corey, here. Gary Glenn is absent. Dave Neal.
Here.
Megan Larson.
Here.
Andrea Pogue.
Here.
Scott Walters.
Here.
And Victoria Madrigal is absent. Ex officio members, Councilwoman Genesis Milam.
Here.
And Rochelle Klein.
Mr. Chair, she's running just a few minutes late.
Thank you. Quorum being present, we will go ahead and proceed with activities. First is approval of the agenda. Are there any comments on the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there's a typo in item 6. The next meeting date is not October 24th. It is November 28th.
Thank you. Further comments?
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the agenda with the correction to item 6.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved with the correction to item 6 next meeting. Further comments? Sensing.
I hate to do this,
Oh, go ahead.
but I went to the HHW meeting earlier today. I don't know if we want to save time for any updates or not, or defer to, oh, you weren't there.
Would you like that added
Yeah, I'd like to add that as a,
as a new business, HHW update?
yes.
Would that be old or new business? Or just as its own standalone item? Andrea? Do you have
To me, it'd be new business.
Okay. New business? Okay. So yes, it's added to, as item 5 on new business. Further comments? And I guess I should say, are you okay with that as the maker of the motion, that be
I
added?
am.
And there's a second.
Yes.
Okay, since the motion is acceptable to the maker in the second, then we'll consider a friendly amendment. Sensing the commission is ready for a vote, all those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The ayes have it. Thank you. Next is approval of the minutes for the September 26th meeting. Are there comments?
No. I don't know what that is.
Comments or motions?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we approve the minutes from September 26th as written.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that the minutes from the September 26th meeting be approved as written. Further comments? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes as written signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. With that, we move on to old business. Item A1, Community Recycling Fund, sub-item A, the Hefty Bag, Energy Bag Program Closeout Report. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commissioners. Can you hear me? Now, there we go. So this is a closeout report for the Hefty Energy Bags. Got just one slide, which I think captures the essential data that the commission might be looking for in a closeout report. I think first and foremost, I'm happy to report that we have given away all the bag kits as of last Friday. So success to that, and we've had tons of great feedback. So maybe just to start at the top, a walk through, and let's talk a little bit about plastics. From the accounting purposes, particularly the Community Recycling Fund, we have accounted for all the costs in $10,740 for the purchase of the bag kits to Boise. That's been invoiced and paid. The reference guides that went along with the kits have been invoiced and paid to the printer supplier for a total of $11,018 out of the Community Recycling Fund. We did experience some operational costs, which we found a way to resolve through the operational budgets in Public Works that were related to we had sent some save the date notices in advance of the bag kits, and because of the way the program was approved, we felt it was appropriate to find a spot in the budget for that rather than try to make the Community Recycling Fund dollars work and whether or not we had to come back. So we found that solution for the cost of $2,591 and a few cents there for a total program cost of $13,609.20. Some statistics over there on the left, 95% of the registrants between the first round of pickup and the waitlisted people picked up kits, so that was just a little more than 1,400 bags out of the 1,500 that we had, which was great. And the remaining were distributed through first come, first served noticing that we gave for an additional week. So it seemed to work out well, and most people were thankful and appreciative of the bags and the kits. We had over 500 website visits last month during the registration time, as well as just during the time that people were actually picking up their kits. You see some statistics there on social media. We had over 14,000 comments on original 200 posts. So a lot of feedback was generated, a lot of conversation, and we are to a point now where I think the best way to describe it is that people are engaging and answering their own questions as a group, which is exactly what we intended to do from a staff perspective, is getting people to be engaged in the conversation. So you can see there all costs are accounted for and paid through finance. All the kits are handed out. As you know, the bags are now available retail in Meridian Albertson stores for, I believe they're $8.99, thereabouts, purchased. We are coordinating with Boise and other cities in looking towards the future of data analysis and how Boise's program is going to look at the data and what we can glean from that for Meridian specifics. We haven't had a conversation about the specifics of how we get there, but we will certainly keep you updated in that process as we do that. And last but not least, I think most importantly, we do have dedicated and engaged users. I know I sent, Mr. Chair, I sent you a comment card that we got from the public box out here that basically said thank you to the city for engaging in this program and helping us find a solution. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions or comments?
Maybe a comment question. As a multifamily resident, since the bags are available at the retail level, is there any opportunity down the road for a multifamily resident to bring the bags to a drop-off location or something like that for recycling?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, at this point, I'm not aware of a drop-off availability, but that is something that we will continue to talk about and see if we can affect that change.
Commission, additional questions or comments? I'd like to go ahead and point out for the record something that's not on here, which is when you opened up the opportunity to sign up, the 1,500, the slots all filled up within 24 hours. So it looked like we did a really good job with the 5% of the community. Took a day to go ahead and fill up the slots, but it seemed like a good step into this business.
Sure, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I think that's a good way to characterize it. I think we did just happen to hit the right timing, I think, through your efforts and the approval of the City Council to approve the 1,500 kits. We got engaged users that were really dedicated to the program and looking for solutions. And maybe by luck, we also got into a retail option just as we were running out of that 1,500. And I think what that helps us do is to keep the program running as effectively as possible in Meridian with engaged users while we can look for ways to expand it and improve it. We didn't go the route of giving everybody a bag and sort of have to do a mass education outreach. and maybe face some different contamination routes or different processes that others have. So I think it was a well-organized and well-laid-out plan.
Mr. Chair, Dave, do you know off the top of your head what will be the date that ends the first year rollout, the bags they were given? So like when?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Poe, are you referring to the date of the Community Recycling Fund application?
No, so people picked up their bags, which had a year's worth, right? Is that September to September 2019? Do you know when will we have a full year's worth of data?
Well, yes, it would effectively be from mid-September to mid-September of 2019. I think some of the challenge will be evaluating as best we can through route tracking and various points of data who may use their bags quicker. What's been advertised across the valley is if you have these bags, you're free to use them as much as you want or as little as you want. You know that there have been several people that have said, so I can put 2 bags in at a time if I need to. And so we know there's those people. And then I think there are some people that actually don't fill up a bag maybe for 1, 2, or 3 cycles. So just going to be a little bit of flexibility in finding a sufficient amount of data. I would like to look at the data quarterly and see what we get at least. So.
Right.
Mr. Chair. Megan, you could bring me your bag and I'll take it home with me. Bring it to SWAC every month.
Well, Mr. Chair, another question. Since they're available at retail locations, can anybody just buy a bag and throw them in their can, right? So there's no...
You have a recycling can, yes, you can
Yeah.
place the energy bag in the recycling can.
I'll just stop by Genesis House.
So it's really less of a pilot, because anybody can participate, right? Right, so I guess that's what, Mr. Chair, Dave, I'm wondering for planning purposes, I'm sure this commission will look forward to updates as the data comes in and is reviewed and analyzed, but also as for future planning, you know, I'm not quite sure what your timeline is for looking at after the year ends, what happens to Meridian's program. So we'll look for your direction. I would say the commission, you know, would look to your direction.
Commissioner Poe, I think that segues probably into topic of new business on the number 1 as well. Keep it in suspense.
Okay.
Additional comments or questions? Thank you, Dave. And if I could impose on you to go ahead and run through those 5 pictures. As the commission may have noticed, we had the ribbon cutting for the little library. And just to quickly show a couple of shots during that time period, that was Joe Borton going ahead and cutting the ribbon, so to speak, well, dedicating it. This is kind of some shots of the operation. Go ahead and this is the people that were in attendance. So it was well attended, and just some more shots of the citizens using the library. And I think it was very well received. So I'll defer to Meg if you've got anything you want to add to, Megan, if you've got anything you want to add to that.
I'll just add a little bit that I've heard from the library staff, thank you, Mr. Chair, is that they feel that it's successful so far, and what they've observed that's interesting is the tiny library is tiny, but that the small scale works well for the target population, which is the 0 to 5 kids. It's just a small space, and they just get right in and start reading their books and playing with the, you know, sensory tables and things like that. It's scaled well to the very young child population, and they find that they seem to feel very comfortable there. It's well used.
Thank you, Dave. And I will go ahead and pass on the comment that I keep getting told from Audra, that everyone says it's small, but I'm used to being in the bookmobile and it's larger than the bookmobile, so I think it's really big. So yes, it's very much appreciated what we did for the library, and I need to pass that back to you, that they have been very open and frequent in saying how much they appreciate our support. So, moving on to the next item related to that, 1B, the Meridian Community Recycling Fund Program, an open window discussion. And Andrea, do you want to background this?
Sure. So we're at that time of year when the commission needs to decide whether we're going to open the window to receive Community Recycling Fund project applications for FY19. Important to the discussion is that the approximate balance going forward in the fund is approximately $33,000. We haven't received all the final closeout receipts, so it may be a little more, a little less from the projects that were approved in FY18. So that's your fund balance to work with. In terms of, I handed out the draft annual report, which is later in the agenda, but if you just turn to page 1 of it, on B1, A through E, it shows the revenue sources for the funds from where they came. And you'll notice there was none received from the residential recycling program because of the year we had. That's not predicted to change. So we did have other sources of revenue. However, the largest one was due to Republic Services rebate on the 2018 HHW program. So that was something that may be a once and done, and we can't anticipate that'll repeat. So I think, conservatively, the fund balance is probably where it's at for the foreseeable future, with only minor revenue maybe to be anticipated in FY19. So with that, it's open for discussion.
Dave, can you remind me from your slide, you were, I think it's actually closer to 13,609.
Mr. Chair, those were the total program costs. The total amount to the Community Recycling Fund was $11,018.
Oh, okay. And that's what we have on our draft worksheet here is the 11,018. So thank you. Okay. Did we collect, did the banner get included in the Recycle a Bicycle?
Yes.
Okay. So these numbers. Okay.
So that's what I attached. When we get to the annual report, Carrie printed the ledger. That's what I've attached to it for the fund. So you can see the top page is for 2019 going forward. The second page is where we're at with 2018. And I included 2017 for informational purposes. So when we get to the annual report, we can go through that in a little more detail as to, for the report's sake. But for the discussion about the open window, I think the most relevant thing is we're at about 33,000. 26 of that came from that HHW rebate. So without that, we'd be, under 10,000.
Members of the commission, any comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, Mike, I guess I'm reluctant to open a window for grants, given that we can't predict that we'll have any revenue coming in, and we have some good programs that we would probably like to continue, like Recycle a Bicycle and things that will need at least a little bit of funding. So until we see a revenue stream coming back, I'd be reluctant to spend down the balance that we have.
Mr. Chair, I'm of like mind. Is Commissioner Larson?
I would prefer to be conservative with it as well. Affirmative, Mark.
I would concur with the previous comments. How's that? No, I think it'd be safe that we should, programs like this, if we turn into a kind of an alternate year or as volatile as our income is, I think there's an expected commitment from us for the bicycle program and some others. We should plan for.
Obviously, if we're not going to open a window, there's no motion that needs to be made and whatever else. So now would be the appropriate time for a motion, but sensing the commission is of mind that we not open a window, I'll proceed with that. Going once, going twice. Okay. Thank you for the report. And we move on to item 2 under old business, trash or treasure citywide program planning discussion. Brett is unable to attend.
Yes, he had personal circumstances come up so that he couldn't attend today. So I would recommend continuing it to the November agenda.
And unless there's an objection, we'll do that. Okay, we move on to new business. First item under new business, solid waste roles and responsibilities discussion. Dave.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, so this is a follow-up conversation on roles and responsibilities. If you're not aware, as of last night, Council approved a request for a solid waste administrator analyst position to fill within the city roles. So I think that's a good success, and that echoes back to our conversations of last month about looking at the city's roles and responsibilities and how we can better effectively manage solid waste within the city. And how we can help SWAC resources as well do that. So last night we did ask council for approval, and they did grant that approval for a full-time employee resource. So we will be proceeding forward with a hiring process for a solid waste coordinator. In conjunction with that, and I'm happy to answer questions, this is maybe a little more of an open conversation topic. There would need to be some updates to the solid waste ordinance and the Solid Waste Advisory Commission ordinance to reflect that change. What you have in front of you is a red line draft of what those changes could look like. We've reviewed that through with finance and legal as well for consistency in ordinance language. Essentially what you have, and maybe I'll walk through it at a high level, in section 2.61, what we've essentially tried to capture is that there's now a resource to work in conjunction with SWAC, and that's what that language states. The powers and duties, what we tried to reflect was the SWAC's ability to a lot of review and recommend what's brought to them potentially from this position is how we see operating going forward. And we wanted to reflect that maybe there's not as much work being done by this commission of the technical aspects, which we've been greatly appreciative of in the past, but recognize that that's probably not necessarily to ask a commission to do. So now that we have this resource, it becomes more of a collaborative effort between that resource and the commission itself. So those are the duties and powers and how we try to reflect those changes. I won't go through every single one of them unless you want to do that. In high level and summary on the last page 2, section 263 under membership and qualifications, we also talked about revising this language to reduce the minimum required number of commissioners. There was a feeling that we were getting up to a almost unwieldy size, and when renewals were having to come due, we're having to try to find members to place on the commission, and felt that maybe it's better to take an approach of let's ensure the positions that we do want. We know we want a youth representative, we know we want some technical representation, and we know we want Meridian residents and business representation. So we reflected that in the what's now the 5 minimum as I read through this. But what the language does is refer back to the overall commission guiding ordinance language for all commissions, which state you can still have up to 9. So what this language does is try to capture, you need a minimum of 5, ties back to the overriding ordinance language, which says you can have up to 9. So that's what's captured in 263. Maybe at that point, stand for any questions and maybe a little direction on how you'd like to proceed, whether you want to review through each one of these, whether you'd like to take some time and look at them and then have follow-up conversation.
Mr. Chair, Dave, I'm wondering if your timeline for bringing the ordinance for approval could wait until SWAC's next meeting in November. That date is November 28th, so that maybe the commissioners can have a chance to review the proposals and come back with comment or requested changes. I don't know if the commissioners would appreciate having that opportunity or not. I just thought I would ask Dave how the timeline looks.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Pogue, that sounds very reasonable. Our timeline for staffing resourcing, as we'd like to say, we'd like to have it in house as quickly as possible. We do know there's challenges with hiring and the markets are busy. Our target is the beginning of the new year, so January 1 is kind of our goal. If it happens before, great. If it happens after, that's just what we're going to have to deal with. So I think there's certainly time for the commission to consider these changes and consider any other changes they want, and some direction and feedback on that as well between now and in the end of the calendar year.
Thanks, Dave.
I have a question on the numbers. So if the council has recommended a minimum of 5, but it can grow beyond that number, is the quorum based on the number of filled seat or based on the minimum 5? And how does that work?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I would look to our legal representation to answer that.
So, for example, right now in this commission, Commissioner Caldwell's term ended September 30th, and due to her personal circumstances, she chose not to apply to renew that, her commission. So, right now, we are a potential body of 9, but we have a vacant seat. So quorum is based on 8 that are filled and active, and a quorum is half plus 1. So, like, for example, we have a quorum today. With regard to going forward, as Dave stated, there's in the opening code section on all the commissions, commissions can have up to 9 seats. So even though 263 gives some more specific direction, it's more of what's a minimum number that it's got to have, but it can have more, up to 9. So I think, does that answer your question or not?
I think so.
But that's where, this is a product of staff's input, and, this commission, you're the working body and with the experience. And if you would like to propose anything differently or to it or other numbers, as long as it doesn't exceed 9, and you would be fine. So the big change here is removal of the staff seats on the commission, which will bring this commission in line with all the other commissions that the city has, wherein they're supported by a staff position. There is a dedicated staffer who really does the behind-the-scenes legwork and brings reports and works with the chair for the agenda. And that hasn't been the case here for SWAC for all these years, because we didn't have a dedicated solid waste employees. We didn't have that function filled. So that the the solution was to have 3 seats filled by staff from finance, legal, and public works. So we could kind of, cover the bases and give our input to the commission. So that's the big change in membership. The consensus was, as Dave reviewed, is to get, this creates the opportunity to have a different blend of members, some with specific solid waste expertise, some with maybe business ownership type interests, some, so the industry experts don't need to be residents of the city. Up till this point, everybody had to be a member, a resident of Meridian, and we thought, well, that was kind of limiting. So freeing up some seats by taking staff off, we get to create some seats, and so that's the idea of what's being proposed here, is to get a better blend of, trash and recycling industry experts, business ownerships, because I think this commission does want to get the city and Republic Services and this commission can take on some of the commercial programs, or and maybe look at those for once, which we never have done, and maybe having a business-oriented Meridian business people on the commission might help with that endeavor. So we have general citizens, a youth citizen, business-oriented citizens, and solid waste expert interests represented. But the numbers were debated kind of, among staff. So anyone here on the commission, you guys are the working body. So, if you want to propose alternatives or something different, staff would like to hear that, and I'm sure City Council would appreciate getting your feedback as well as they take it on to consider and approve.
Thanks for the background information. It helps, when I read through this.
Commissioners, additional questions or comments? And with that, you have your assignment to consider this and be ready to comment on it at the November meeting.
Before we move on, just one quick question for Dave, I suppose. I noticed that the policies is crossed out in the couple provisions where it's mentioned, like, review and recommend rules, regulations, and fees. What was policies never a thing that SWAC did, or kind of what's the rationale behind? Is that a role that staff would do now, or like what's the change there?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, that's the intent, is that, as Commissioner Pogue alluded to, is that the staff will be bringing you those conversations as they're being developed. And so the discussion with staff was, does policy really, is SWAC charged with developing policy or reviewing, recommending policy? Certainly, SWAC is free to ask, like any other commissioner, to look into policies and consider development of policies, but we didn't feel like it was right to ask a commission to develop a policy, particularly now with this resource, dedicated resource, we'll be bringing you that information. So that was the only on that.
I don't want to belabor it. I'm still slightly confused, though, because it's crossed out altogether. Versus rules and regulations are still there as a review thing as opposed to a develop thing, which makes total sense to me, but policies is crossed out altogether.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I think the intent really is to try and get at the root of what the commission wants to be doing. So again, suggested language, the thought was, are policies developed by the commission, or are policies developed by the council and the leadership? Maybe mincing words, maybe policies is a fine word, and so we can certainly look into that and maybe bring back some additional information on that.
Mr. Chair, no, I just was trying to clarify. So the council is the more appropriate entity to do that, is what I'm hearing. So
Certainly any legal feedback on that, happy to.
I think David and I can talk about it more this month and bring back some feedback, but good question. You know, that's appropriate review and comment, and that we're hoping to hear from you guys.
Additional oops, Dave.
Just one last comment on that, Mr. Chair, is that generally policies are, I don't know that they're enforceable, so to speak, versus a rule and a regulation or an ordinance. And so maybe it was just an effort at this point to clean up the language. You know, policies, procedures, in my mind, sometimes they're adopted formally, like a human resource policy guide. Sometimes they're just general policies and guidelines. So I think that might have been the initial intent.
Additional comments? Please take some time to consider this before the next meeting. We will now move on to new business item number B2, sidewalk container placement update. And Rochelle still has not been, let's see, and Conrad, are you going to kick this off?
No, I did send Rochelle a text message, and that was 10 minutes ago. No, 12 minutes ago, she said she was 10 minutes out. So I expect her to burst through the doors at any moment.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Andrea, let's see, I think this was initiated by
Mr. Price,
Mr.
who
Price.
is in the audience.
That's what I was thinking of. So Conrad, thank you, and we'll pick Rochelle's stuff up when she shows up, but I think we'll turn to Mr. Price and let him go ahead and express his original concern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners.
Chair, if you'd like any background, we can offer that up as well.
Okay. Mr. Price, go ahead and state your name and your address for the record, and then please feel free to go ahead and bring us up to date on your concern.
Thank you very much. So my name is Aaron Price. My address is 605 West Tall Prairie in Meridian. That's behind the Kentucky Ridge development off of Victory in between Meridian Road and Linda Road. Earlier this month, I passed on some feedback to the city through Nextdoor, and it's my understanding that you have that with you, so I'll go ahead and read that. The intro just talked about how much I love the city of Meridian and that I use the sidewalks extensively as a runner. I then stated that I strongly urge the city to take a stand against allowing garbage cans on the sidewalk for residents' weekly trash pickup schedule. I have emailed Republic before and received a weak response. At the root of the issue, putting garbage cans on the sidewalk states trash is more important than public safety. The best example of this principle is coming up quickly, Halloween night. The cans are large and force pedestrians to either walk in the street or the homeowner's yard to pass. I was very excited to get the city code reference, which is also on the same page, and I found it interesting that in the the first sentence, it states, customers shall place wheeled carts containing solid waste or recyclable materials to be collected by the franchisee at the alley or street curb. And so the key word is at the alley or street curb. In preparing for today's meeting, I went on Republic's website, and they have a Meridian City residential trash and recycling guide. And I find a language conflict there, as their instructions from Republic cart placement guide states, place carts at least 3 feet away from other carts or objects and 3 feet apart on the curb. Now I interpret at the alley or street curb in a way such that it's basically in front of it or next to it. On the curb would state that it's physically on top of the curb. Now there's different sidewalks and curb placements in different neighborhoods, and in fact the Kentucky Ridge development in front of ours has the sidewalk connected to the curb. So in order for a resident to put their trash can on the curb, it will effectively block all of the sidewalk. In the Oakwood Estates development, which my home is located in, there is a grass strip in between the curb and the sidewalk, so all of the residents put ours in the street at the curb. So I understand the business challenges. I empathize with Republic as a business person by trade and education. However, to me, it's simply a matter of what's more important. On the residential trash guide, on the second page for the trash guidelines, it states in the first bullet point, it gives some guidelines. Trash and recycling must be set out by 7 a.m. The last sentence says, do not block sidewalks. So in their own guide, by stating that it should go on the curb, but yet not block a sidewalk, to me, that's a oxymoron. It's catch-22. You cannot put it on the curb and not block the sidewalk. The definition of blocking means to either impede or stop the flow. So as someone who is walking on the sidewalk, the cans are big enough that you could not pass by the can without being impeded. So those are my thoughts. I'm happy to bring up some suggestions. My thoughts are to change first of all, I would suggest that Republic update the guide to match the city code, which would once again say at the alley or the curb. I would recommend that we state that the cans do not go on the sidewalk or on the curb, but that they would be at, which should be generally on the street. Ideas for helping get that message out would be stickers on the cans. Another idea is I often see homeowners are good at getting them out there, but not always great at taking them back. And so the placement from the Republic employees, once they've emptied the can, if they could put them on the street, that would go a long way in impeding traffic for as short amount of time as possible. Our first neighborhood, when we moved in about 6 years ago, I would always put it on the street, at the curb, whereas our neighbors would put it on the sidewalk. And by the time we moved out, after 5 years, the whole neighborhood was putting it in the street and not on the sidewalk. So I think it would catch on if led by example by Republic, by putting the cans on the street. And once again, the main issue here is just public safety, right? People belong on sidewalks, not trash, not recycling. That's what they're built for, and that's what they're required for. So,
Thank you. Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments on Mr. Price's presentation?
I'd be curious for those that have been here longer than me, Commissioner. Has this topic ever come up before?
There was a time when it came up. I'll go ahead and express my thoughts, but I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and, does anyone have anything more for Mr. Price?
No, Mr. Chair, Mr. Price, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to come and speak to the commission. We love to hear from the citizens. We too believe public safety trumps. And I appreciate it. I'm sure Conrad, representing Republic Services here today, is thankful for you pointing out the discrepancy between their guides and our code. The code does have to be followed. So thank you for pointing that out. That can get addressed swiftly. I think your ideas about stickers, we do have stickers through Republic Services. So we can hear from Rochelle, who's here now, about maybe why that didn't happen when you called in. But I know that has been an effective remedy to get the neighborhood kind of awareness up. So thank you for that suggestion. I would remind you that thank you for submitting to Nextdoor so we could timely take this up and you can be part of the discussion. But you know, it's also a code enforcement issue, and so that call can be made if there is an offending property owner that you're not getting help any other way. You can call that in. That doesn't mean that code will come out and immediately ticket, or charge them with a misdemeanor. It is a misdemeanor offense because of the public safety concerns. However, the city strives hard to gain compliance instead of, enforcement and efforts. So, and they're really good at that. So we always have, between Public Services and code enforcement, as remedies to try and find solutions. If SWAC gets involved, that's usually really bringing resources together in a way that we can make a successful outcome for these type of concerns. So I just thank you for bringing the topic up and to our awareness.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I've got a couple comments, not necessarily a question. Do appreciate you being here. It is such a tricky situation, and a lot of times it's, yeah, I want to cry. It could have to do with, really has to do with just people being careless. So a couple of things. My husband puts ours on the sidewalk, but it's at the edge of the sidewalk, and it leaves most of the sidewalk. There's still very walkable. I take him for walks in the stroller, and I often have to go in the street because people put it in the middle of the sidewalk. So if people were just respectful of even the way that it is now, it could be done, but it's changing all of those people and their bad habits. But one thing that I think before anything is done needs to be checked with our police, because we do have some streets that are narrow, and changing the policy to put them in the streets. So we have some streets that you cannot park on the street because the streets are too narrow. So if by having trash cans on both sides of the street does not allow for a fire truck to fit through, that will be a concern. So from council perspective, I think that's something that we need to check with our emergency services prior to making a decision. It is, and I'm with you because it's very, very frustrating, and I wish people were just more respectful and put them way at the edge of the sidewalk, and we can all fit. So, thanks.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I appreciate what Councilwoman said. I mean, I think it's hard to say to citizens, be careful, am I in the middle or am I at the edge? Like, I love black and white rules, and I understand that those streets that are narrow, that could be problematic, but I think too, just encouraging citizens to think about it a little bit can be enough to change behavior. So some stickers, maybe something in the utility bill that reminds people to put it not on the sidewalk might be enough to help start a change.
And obviously, my immediate desire at this point is to go ahead and release Mr. Price. So if anyone has any comments or questions of Mr. Price, now's the time. Otherwise, the conversation will continue.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Mr. Price, for bringing this before us. We'll definitely continue to discuss it, and feel free to come on back into the conversation as it progresses.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Mr. Price, I'm Rochelle Klein. I believe I've worked with you, and sorry, we had a cat in a trash truck. You probably heard. We have this every couple weeks now. It seems like we have a cat that comes out of a trash truck, so we've got to scramble to keep it safe before the end of the day. So I apologize for being late. I want to make sure that you feel like your needs were met in your neighborhood.
So could you restate that?
Just on the cart placement, I want to make sure, we've been trying to work with residents throughout Meridian to make sure that their needs are met in their specific neighborhoods. And so we have had people, asked to have, for access reasons, to have carts moved in the street, and other people, the code is flexible enough for us to work independently, like with different neighborhoods, to make sure their needs are met. And are you feeling like yours are met in your neighborhood at this time? Or is it something?
I have not seen any change yet, so.
Okay.
Once again, I was just trying to pass on feedback and make a suggestion for an improvement, so I have not noticed the cans have not been moved, so, maybe the sidewalks, I assume there has to be a code of the sidewalk width, and so the 95-gallon cans take up the majority of that. And so they have not been moved out of that way, so that in the Kentucky Ridge development, that is, I guess, no would be the answer.
Okay, and I can work with you after this meeting, and I can reach out, and so we can work with your HOA or your neighborhood. We did just send out it would have gone out the 5th and the 20th, and Carrie's not here, I believe, in the latest Meridian City Utility Bill, we did put a cart placement article in there about, and asking people how to, put their cart out so people could safely navigate around them and the best location for overhead clearance and sidewalk clearance and things like that. So, but if you have concerns, and I'm happy to work with you outside of SWAC to see if we can make your neighborhood more accessible to everybody, I guess.
Fantastic.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Mark, to answer your question, I do remember this issue when it was brought before the council. I believe it was probably when the ordinance was being put together. And coincidentally, just before that, a month or two before we had this come up, there was an article in one of my trade journals that was talking about an issue about if the wheels of the cart are in the gutter, then you have the opportunity for silt from the wheels to go into the runoff, and that being an issue. And then I remember the conversation turning quite extensively about the differences in the city about whether there's a sidewalk or not, whether there's a curb or not, and trying to express where a can needs to be placed, which led to the wording that's in the ordinance at this point, where it needs to be within 3 feet one side or the other of what effectively would be the curb of the street, so that based on the peculiarities of a particular residence, it could be up on the grass, it could be out in the street, wherever, as long as it was within that area. So that tells you where we've been. It doesn't mean that that's where we're going, but just kind of as a reference about how we got to the wording that's in the ordinance as it stands now.
Yeah, it stands to reason to me that as we talk about even more types of trash receptacles and people that may have had one and now two and maybe three going forward. To be fair, I've never really, I assumed the behavior of the neighborhood that I moved into. And I guess I just never really made an effort to put those out into the street. And I'd be curious operationally for public services, is there a preference on whether those are accessible in the street, or does that, and then you're
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Nelson, not really. I mean, access for us is access, so as long as we can grab it with an automatic arm and tip it into the top of the truck, that's what we care about. So sometimes if they're on the sidewalk, there's a tree over the top, and so we don't have the 14-foot clearance to dump it in the top of the truck. But that doesn't mean that if you scoot it out into the gutter with the handle facing the house, that the branches are like magically gone. It's really about access for us. So we don't have a preference. As long as it's 3 feet on either side and 14 feet overhead, we're good on either the sidewalk or in the street.
Is there ever?
Oh, sorry, Mr.
Is there any conflicting recommendations from homeowners associations that say they don't want them in the street? And
so, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Nelson, we have been getting feedback for both, and we always say city protocol is on the sidewalk with the wheels right at the curb, and we have had, I think, 3 or 4 different situations now where we've moved entire neighborhoods into the street with the wheels in the gutter and the handle facing the house because we've had access issues on the sidewalk, and so we've just cleared portions, and we've just reached out to neighbors and worked independently. We always ask that the HOAs resolve it first, and if they can't, then they come to us for support, or in the city or SWAC for support. But usually we'll pick it up wherever that HOA or neighborhood decides that they want them placed. But definitely, we always say city preference is on the sidewalk. But we don't have access issues unless there's something, blocking it.
Mr. Chair, I recall discussion and expressed concerns of the postal service about not having it in the street because it impedes their service function. So it gets tricky on the narrow streets, for postal service routes, as well as just the Meridian is a city of really different neighborhood layouts, from old rural type neighborhoods. I don't even have a curb, I have grass, so right up to the street. So, you know, to the more modern narrow street, you know, neighborhoods with narrow streets, to other ones with lovely grass next to their sidewalk, and others without. So I do know the thought that went into the current code was significant, and it has been in place for years. I think for Republic Services, Mr. Price did point out that Republic Services Meridian Guidelines has slightly different language than the code, so that has to be cleaned up. You know, so that, you know, I provided the code section, and that just can be a tweak that gets done. Did
you forward me the inconsistency? So we're actually in the process right now of updating the brochure, so this is a perfect time for us to get that in sync with the code.
If you could meet with Mr. Price, or Mr. Price pointed out to Rochelle, that'd be awesome.
Bet.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add
Councilwoman.
2 more cents, whatever it's worth. If there are no logistical reasons and no safety reasons, I personally would love to see carts moved to the street. It is a safety concern having them on the sidewalks. Kids walking to school, riding their bikes to school, and having to ride into the street to dodge trash cans. I mean, I've seen it go on for years. So if the street width being a safety issue is not an issue, I would recommend taking a look at that and requiring street placement. I mean, if they don't get their mail because they block their mailbox, people know, they should know not to block their mailbox, and if they don't, they'll figure it out when they don't get their mail. It would be my...
The mail carrier, when we first got carts in Boise, I blocked our mailbox and they have little tags like we have, and said,
They'll let them know.
"We delivered your mail today, but next time
Right.
we won't if you block it again." So they were pretty good about notifying us of being too close to the mailbox.
But being as many walkers to school that we have, I think it's a much larger safety concern having them just placed wherever on the sidewalk or wherever at people's discretion. So I think it's worth taking a good hard look at.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, maybe to follow up on that, from staff's perspective, we are certainly willing to help in that effort of research, as well as any social media. I know Mr. Larson mentioned, how can we get a message out? Once that message is decided upon, we can help in that regard with Republic as well, as whether that's social media or not. In fact, we had this issue come across through the Public Works social media site, and next door they grabbed a hold of it and said, we should respond to this, and we said, hang on, we need to talk to the commission. So certainly ready and willing and able to help out if that's what the commission chooses.
I, for one, would be very appreciative to go ahead and have some alternate wording from other cities on their ordinance on cart placement, if it would be possible for staff to go ahead and check with some of the other communities in the valley, maybe some other communities outside of the valley, that just give us some ideas of some alternate language that might address these issues, because I'm sure everyone across the country has the same concerns.
Happy to do that.
And Mr. Chairman, we do work with ACHD. Republic Services works with ACHD to know when their street sweeping, when our their street sweeping schedule and our trash collection schedules might conflict. So, for example, my service day is Friday, and we know which day. So ACHD doesn't sweep our street on a Friday. Like we've worked together so closely over the years that we're pretty much in sync. There are some pockets of different towns where there's some conflicts, but for the most part, we work really closely with ACHD to make sure they can sweep the streets on days when there aren't carts out there to block, if that helps. I mean, just information, I guess, so you guys know.
Thank you, Rochelle. Mr. Chair, I would point out that our code does say that wheeled carts shall be positioned clear of pedestrian and vehicular traffic. So it's pretty clear. I don't know how much clearer you can get. At the curb it gives you that, it's at one way or the other. And then it gives you some parameters as to what can't be within 3 feet of, a variety, a list of objects that can be out there as well. In no case can it be positioned more than 4 feet from the curb. And I think that was to help with the sidewalk issue, but also not to go projecting into the street too far. So I think looking at other language from other cities, it can be part of our research, and we can continue this item to the next agenda and revisit the subject at that point in time.
Well,
Mr.
this ordinance gives you a lot of options, but we don't really say that that wheeled carts in street preferred where possible. It just gives them parameters. So we don't really give them a kind of a recommended order. Being reasonable that some cases they can't do that, so it has to go in there. So if you can do it any way you want, you'll just do however you've always done it. Speaking of myself again.
Commissioner Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similarly, I'm a little more confused than when we started because like at least 3 feet from the curb or something, that can be smack in the middle of the sidewalk. That's 3 feet from the curb. So I like plain language that says if there is a sidewalk in your neighborhood, don't put your trash can on it. Or, and if there's no sidewalk in your neighborhood and it's so much this close to the side. I don't know what the right language is, but it doesn't seem super clear. And what I heard Rochelle say is that they're deferring to the homeowners association, which is a little troubling because they're not writing ordinance for the city. The city's writing ordinance for the city, so they don't get to decide, they don't get to trump the ordinance that say, no, we want it on the sidewalk.
Just to respond to what you're saying, that's true, but the code is flexible enough to allow carts to, we went through this early, maybe a couple of years ago for the first time, where it was wheelchair access, I think, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And so we looked at the code, and the code, the way it's written, really the code is designed to allow pedestrian access to be free. So it says, your cart should be on the sidewalk, and or maybe it doesn't, but it's implied that it should be on the sidewalk with the wheels right at the curb, meaning that there's a walkway. So not just right in the middle of the sidewalk blocking it, but also at the curb or the gutter. So the wheels could be in the street up against the curb or on the sidewalk up against the curb. But the idea is to pull it out of traffic or out of the pedestrian right of way. And so that was the intent where we had specific issues arise where we have had access issues, and I think we've had 3 or 4 cases where we'll have one homeowner want the sidewalks clear and they want everything in the street. So we'll say, we'll take it to your homeowners association first because their flexibility is there. And then if they don't resolve it, they come to us, and then we do need to require access. So we will ask them within a certain radius to move all their carts into the street with the wheels in the gutter to allow for access. But we've only had that happen probably 3 times, I think, since 2012, April 1st of 2012, when we merged with Sanitary Services. We've only had 3 cases where we've had to intervene with cart placement. So I think that's pretty good.
Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman.
I just had another thought, and I guess this partly goes to Republic Services, and not to throw them under the bus, but it's nobody's fault. But even if somebody has the nicest placement of their receptacle in the morning, once that arm picks it up, it places it back on the sidewalk, sometimes cockeyed, sometimes further in, and they don't have the ability to line it up perfectly at the edge of the sidewalk. So I think that's another reason to, consider street placement. because it just goes and it goes back down, not as neatly as it might have been placed to begin with. I just thought about that because sometimes when I come home, when I start in the morning, my trash cans are way out at the edge, and when after they're done, they're just wherever. Could be blocking the sidewalk.
Commissioners, of course, motions are always in order, but on the other hand, if we're directing staff to come back with us with alternate wording, then we don't really need much more of a motion on this, or I don't know if there are comments or motions or.
Mr. Chair, I would just say that I would love to look at alternate wording and, recent news with other activities in the city, clear sidewalks seems to be a priority for Meridian. So, I think we should make sure that if we are updating the wording, that it reflects that keeping the sidewalks clear is a priority where possible. Not everybody has a sidewalk and et cetera.
I concur.
So without objection, we'll go ahead and direct staff to go ahead and see if they can get some alternate ordinance wording from other communities within the Treasure Valley. Dave, I
Position's
appreciate
already gonna pay dividends.
Mr. Chair, I can take on that assignment if that's okay, Dave.
It's fine.
Andrea, thank you for stepping up. So with that, we'll go ahead and pick this up again at the next meeting. And we move on to the next item, B3, Republic Services FY18 fourth quarter year-end report. Conrad.
But Mr. Chair, are you sure? Not to, can I go right back to the last subject just for a second? So I just asked Rochelle if there are any other communities that require street placement. And the answer she said was everybody else. So we are the only municipality that allows sidewalk placement whatsoever. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and Councilwoman Milam, to add to that, we've just been recently moving everybody into the street as well. So Middleton moved into the street. I don't know where Conrad is. Was that 2 years ago? Were you part of that? Middleton. So we've just, we have had cities recently move into the street from the sidewalk. So Meridian is our last contract where their sidewalk is preferred.
Conrad.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for your time today. My name is Conrad McDaniel with Republic Services, here to report on fiscal year 2018 fourth quarter and annual report of fiscal year 2018. I'd like to, so I give 4 of these presentations a year, once each quarter, at the end of each quarter. This is my favorite one because we get to talk about the year as a whole and all the different things that took place. So we'll start off with some highlights of fiscal year 2018. It should be pretty short because not a whole lot happened in the last 12 months, right? Then we'll go into the normal charts that we review in the stats. We began fiscal year 2018 in first quarter with the understanding of a ban on plastics was coming, known as the China's Green Sword. This took effect, or was publicly announced, the very turn of the year in early January. And it was the announcement of the ban on plastics and the restrictions on what can be accepted in the traditional loose recycling cart. This came from China's setting a contamination level of 0.5%. Anything above that, the recycling load would be rejected and sent back to the U.S. if that's where it originated. This forced a global change in the recycling industry and markets as everyone scrambled to clean up the recycling stream and get it to where it would be a marketable product and one of value once again. In order to do so, we had to reduce the acceptance of plastics to number 1 and number 2, plastic bottles and jug containers. These remain to have a high quality and high value in the marketplace for traditional recycling. There was a ban on water bottles, even if they were labeled with a number 1 or a number 2. So this was a major shakeup in the recycling industry here regionally, on the West Coast, nationally, and globally. It impacted everybody. The solution that we saw was to find new markets and as fast as we could. We also realized we need to re-educate the community on proper recycling, and not just on plastics, but overall practice of recycling. As time goes on, people kind of get a little sloppier with their practice, and it was time to readdress that along with the changes in plastic recycling. You can see there the product mix of a traditional or average bale of recyclable material. 8% of it is 1 through 7 plastics, and that's what we were really focused on, is reducing that to meet the new recycling restrictions. The 1 and 2s, I understand, is 4% of that 8%, so half of that would still be accepted in the recycling. So we'd really only look at losing 4% of plastics, and then also want to address it, reducing that 10% trash part of the contamination in that recycling mix. There came a search for markets around China, since that's where most of the Western recycled goods went, and those doors had been shut with the Green Sword initiative. So other markets around China were sought out and found, smaller countries in Asia. But being smaller countries, they can't take in as much as China. So the acceptance of how much product they could take was not nearly the same as we were used to with China. So what you saw was commodity pricing tank. We all saw that on a monthly basis. And the further away you get from the West Coast, the harder it felt. Materials stockpiled as markets were searched and found. Again, not as large markets as we have been used to, so material was stockpiled at those ports and or landfilled in some cases. I mentioned water bottles. Water bottles and soft plastics really put paper recycling at risk, and we were seeing down the line, if this doesn't get cleaned up and changed and improved, that we could see mixed paper go away, just like we saw with some plastics. And if you're looking back at the top for the product mix material of recycling, that would be, you're looking at half the recycling goods not accepted anymore. That has not been the case, but it was something that we were seeing as an actual possibility as we would go through 2018. As I mentioned, we looked for solutions to the ban on plastics, and out of nowhere, it seemed, we came across this Hefty Energy Bag solution, and it was actually really kind of a savior, and has many positives. Mr. Miles addressed it earlier in today's agenda, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it is a program that accepts solution for number 4 through 7 plastics, which would be that 4% of the plastics I mentioned on the previous slide. It provides for regional use of the plastics and no value plastics. So those that we had recycled before, but then the ban came, that instantly made those materials have zero value or trash in some cases. So this provided a new life for those types of plastics. And it was a regional solution. The material collected in the orange bags is sent to Salt Lake City, as we know, Renewology, to be used as an alternative fuel source and a domestic use of fuel. The orange bag program is a better solution. Well, as far as collection purposes, it's better because it's more accepting of materials. So you have the 4 through 7s, which we recycled on a traditional basis prior to 2018, but now it includes materials that were not allowed in the recycling stream and were a cause of contamination. Items like styrofoam or foam materials could now go in the orange bag. Soft plastics, plastic bags, Ziploc bags were now accepted in the orange bag program. So it really provided a benefit to divert more items from the landfill. Even more recent was the start of glass recycling in the city of Meridian. Curbside glass subscription became available to sign up in September of 2018, so just a month ago. And I'm not even sure if signups were offered for a full month, but by the month end, we already had 140 subscribers to that program. With the first collection scheduled in October, and I don't have the numbers on that yet, but they'll be in my next quarterly report. It is monthly pickup or every 4-week service with a 65-gallon cart. We have found that size to be very helpful in our service of heavy glass material and getting it in the truck without creating mess and without losing carts and without the cart being too heavy. The subscription service for curbside glass is $6.47 a month. If customers choose to or willing to participate in glass recycling but not willing to pay for the subscription service, there is public drop site available at the Meridian transfer station, and that is available 24 hours, 7 days a week at the transfer station. Types of glass accepted, bottles and jars only, so no windshields, no Pryex, no fluorescent tubes. We're looking at just bottles and jars and find that that's the most successful and accepted type of glass material. The glass collected is sent to Momentum Recycling in Salt Lake City, where it's pulverized, and then that material is used by Owens Corning in their fiberglass applications. The hand-in-hand recycle box located at the Meridian transfer station for free public drop-off of recycled material, and I believe it's just paper and cardboard at this point, maybe cans as well. Yeah, paper, cardboard, cans, items that really truly have a high value left in the marketplace. I believe this is the most successful hauls we've had of the hand-in-hand recycle box in any one given year. One haul in Q1, one haul in Q2, 4 in Q3, and then 11 in Q4, totaling 17 hauls for the year. Almost 10 tons accumulated for the year, and $558 generated for the Meridian Community Recycling Fund, which is probably $500 more than anyone else is getting. Excuse me. Recycle the Fall 2017. This is in here because it's Q1 of 2018. We had just over 5,000 set-outs, which was an increase of 10% from fiscal year 2017, which would have been fall 2016. This comes out to just under 1,500 cubic yards recycled, which is a 68% increase. And that's something we saw valley-wide. I don't know what it was, but winter snap, and those leaves all fell at once. And you ask any one of our drivers if that number's true, and they'd say yes. Curbside service was available for the first 3 weeks in November. Bags were to be picked up curbside or sidewalk, one of the two, where along with on your trash day, but in a separate truck that was designated for leaf recycling only, which that material was then collected and used in a compost pile. There is also drop-off service available at Meridian Transfer Station free of charge. Rake Up Meridian 2017, 86 homes of the elderly senior citizens in our community and also physically unable to perform rake up duty at their household. We serviced 86 homes that qualified in the city of Meridian. This was done not by myself, but 48 groups, and each group had anywhere from a family of 3 to 30 church members or 30 Key Club members, Honor Society, all sorts of groups, everything in between. So really hundreds of volunteers took to the street and filled almost 1,700 leaf bags that were not belonging to their own house, but somebody else's. 2018 registration for Rake Up Meridian ends in 2 days, and it's funny enough, I looked at how many houses we have signed up so far, and it's exactly 86. I expect that to go up in the next 2 days as people kind of tend to wait till the deadline approaches, but I expect another successful year of that in here in next month. Christmas tree recycling. This takes place the first full week in January. Residents are allowed to put out their Christmas trees if they first must be free of ornaments and tree stand and cut in 4-foot lengths, placed curbside. And last year we saw, this would have been January 2018, we saw just under 1,800 set-outs of trees, and that came out to 105 cubic yards. And you'll see this is a significant decrease from 2016. It's hard to say what happened in 2017 because that was Snowmageddon, and we lost records of trees put out and collected in 2017 with the mission of just get the trees picked up and removed, the ones that we could see on top of the snow. So I hate to say that's not necessarily the percentage drop. It's hard to say without seeing what happened in 2017. It's obviously smaller, but it's hard to say how much smaller with that missing year. Republic Services also offers cleanups throughout the year. There's holiday cleanup. It's the first full week after Christmas, unlimited collection. Spring cleanup, which is as well unlimited collection, but first full week in May. So that seems to work well with people cleaning up and getting things done around their house. It also coincides with Trash to Treasure, and I was hoping Brett would be here today. He's on the agenda, so I didn't want to take up too much of his thunder on there. But I'll just say it's a neighborhood program, and the idea is to get people to, instead of landfilling things that they don't want to use anymore, the idea is to get your neighbors involved and see if it's something maybe they could put to use and give it a second life before sending it to the landfill. 2018 saw the revival of Meridian Community Recycling Fund, and that was because of the good market pricing we had with recycling commodity in 2017. Actually, fair pricing we had in 2017. And we saw funds during that year go into the Meridian Community Recycling Fund, which allowed us to provide that grant for 2018. We had 2 projects apply, and they were both accepted and approved by SWAC and Meridian City Council. The first one was Discovery Park, and their project was to put 35 litter receptacles made from recycled plastic in the new park, which they purchased and had Boy Scouts put together, assemble all 35 of them. The park is set to open in spring of 2019, at which time those receptacles will be installed. The Meridian Mini Library, which we spoke about earlier on today's agenda, was the second recipient of the fund for 2018, and the funds there were put forward to use as purchase of a shipping container and repurpose that shipping container to serve as a community mini library. And the opening of that was October 1st at the Hill in South Meridian. Sorry. Donations and special events. Parks and Recreation Department are allowed free disposal of yard waste at the Meridian Transfer Station, and that's year-round. Many services, trash recycling, are provided to city buildings and departments and parks throughout the city. Republic Services sponsors many events that go on year-round in Meridian City. Special events as well, and donating services to those special events. And over the last, well, since 2012, we've seen that increase a little bit more and more, and I knew we were going to hit 100,000 coming up one of these fiscal years, and it was in 2018 where we surpassed it by $20. So $100,000, $20 donated in services and in sponsorship money to Meridian City, various events and purposes. Next section is charts, recycling charts for 2018. But Mr. Chair, if I'll pause right now, I'll give you a chance to ask any questions.
Commissioners, any questions of Conrad on the data that he's presented from the report? Continue.
Thank you. The rest of this will kind of speed up because we kind of see this stuff every time. So, finished 2018 with curbside recycling tons falling, having a dip. It's the first dip I've seen since we've started service in Meridian, and it didn't fall too much. It was actually still more than 2016, but it did fall short of the mark in 2017 by about 200, less than 200 tons for the year. So not dramatic. That's a little more dramatic as we saw the pricing drop in 2018, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the announcement of the Green Sword and how that impacted the markets and pricing on the commodities. We ended up having a cost of processing the curbside recycling material exceeding $300,000 for the year. I'll just mention, we thought it was bad in 2013, 14, 15, and 16, and it was, but those 4 years combined were $225,000 for that 4-year period, and this 1-year period was was well far past that. Cost per ton, it did drop, almost average $70 per ton to process recycled material. And here's a look at the industry market for pricing on mixed paper. Again, it drops off there towards the end, well, Q4 2017, it starts to fall as rumbling begins about the green sword. And then fiscal year 2018 starts and it really starts to go down. And remember, we were at risk of losing paper altogether. But it shows here towards the end of 2018, the price of paper stabled. It's right there close to zero here locally. And regionally, it's maybe $1 or $2 above zero. But foreign seems to be doing a little bit better at about $25 a ton. So a little bit good news towards the end of 2018. And then here's a look at the same industry market pricing for cardboard. Again, not as drastic as paper. Cardboard always seems to have a little bit better value than its cousin material, paper. But it's been holding on there for the last 6 months, right at $50, $48 per ton. And again, foreign cardboard in foreign markets has been doing a little bit better. It's a trend we've been seeing since I've been keeping track of this. Household hazardous waste, much like the well, man, that's not relevant, but it was kind of averaged out between 2016 and 2017. It came right in the middle there, so we didn't see anything that is too expensive or a drastic drop in cost either. Just kind of maybe found a medium. Average monthly cost of that program, it goes between $55.90 and $55.75 as I've been watching it. But any question about the charts, Mr. Chair?
Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad.
I do have the one last section here.
Okay.
So we will talk about the stats for fiscal year 2018 on trash and recycling. And one thing to notice, and this will kind of streamline the rest of my presentation, is what we saw was increase in trash tons, which is what you'll see on the bottom chart there, and a decrease in recycled tons, which is what you'll see on the top half of the next 3 slides. And that's a common theme through residential curbside recycling, commercial recycling, and industrial recycling. Participation rate went to 90. I think it was probably 89% the year prior, maybe 88%. But you'll see a 3% decrease in tons. I don't want to do a magic trick here, but I said we tried to get rid of 4% of the plastics. Now, that's pretty close, but obviously I can't credit that 3% loss to being plastics, but it is kind of interesting to look at. Again, the number to process that material, 3% increase, almost 4% increase of trash per household. So I thought it's kind of interesting. We saw a 9% decrease in recycling and then a 4% increase in trash, along with a 5% growth. So you add those together, people recycled about 4% less, and you see that in the trash now. That's my theory. Commercial recycling, participation rate, again, a year ago it was probably 44-45%, so we see it continue to tick up. 2% decrease there in commercial recycling regarding tons. Another $100,000 to process that material. So you're looking at over $400,000 to process the recycling between residential and commercial. Commercial trash grew by about 3% in accounts and 20% in trash volume. Industrial, that's pretty much what we see with the growth. That's what I've noticed. About 15 active recycle accounts, and trash tons continue to increase on the construction side of business. Transfer station reception, and we accepted over 237,000 tons of trash during this year. Sounds like a lot, but it's actually a decrease from 2017. If you remember 2017, the Boise transfer station was closed, so a lot of that material was diverted to Meridian transfer station. Well, in 2018, Boise transfer station opened back up, so we saw some relief there. Final slide, household hazardous waste collection. This is just at the Meridian transfer station site. We saw a 3% increase in households and visitors, and 3% increase, oddly enough, in tons collected. So that's nice and clean there. 123 tons collected in 2018, 119 collected year prior. Mr. Chairman, that is conclusion of my presentation.
Commissioners, questions or of Conrad?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just had one comment and one correction on Conrad's stuff. One is that even though Conrad mentioned some paper was landfilled, none of Meridian's paper was ever landfilled. We always had markets locally. That was more of a global.
Yeah, thanks, Rochelle. To clarify, that particular slide was a global situation, and more of what was happening at the ports and not what was happening here.
And then the other thing is, in Conrad's printed presentation, he talks about the approval of the compost facility and curbside composting, and they're different. So City Council approved Timber Creek to move ahead with construction and the regulatory side of opening that facility, and that if the city decides to look at curbside composting, that would come down the line with a council presentation and decision. So they're kind of two different ones.
Mr. Chair, Rochelle, thank you. Yeah, and my apologies to Mercurio. I actually avoided that as much as I could because it's really more of a 2019 discussion.
Yeah.
So I believe the only reference to compost here was for leaves, which I believe were.
Yes.
Yes.
So all the leaves are. There was just a little section in the printed area.
Oh, in the actual report.
In the actual report.
Yes.
So when you read that, just be aware, like that council approved Timber Creek moving forward with developing that site and then going through the regulatory side of things, but not necessarily a curbside program. And then also on the composting side, this year is a little bit different. We added, thank you, Commissioner Nelson, we added the leaf recycling drop boxes as soon as the landfill made it available, because we had a lot of requests for leaves coming out of Meridian, as you guys all know. And so I have to work with Teresa to get, it actually beat the route numbers. So we usually put those out closer to November, and this year leaves have fallen early. And so I think I've heard from a number of you, please let's get the boxes out early and get those leaves going. Well, they're already filling up. So thank you. So you're doing a good job. So yes, thank you for your feedback. We have to get the route numbers over to Teresa by tonight or tomorrow. So sorry about that. But you guys are doing a great job getting those leaves in. So.
Commissioners, additional questions or comments on the presentation?
Thank you, Conrad.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners.
The next item on the report is the draft SWAC annual report. Andrea, do you want to background that?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I apologize. I have a 6:30 meeting and I'm going to have to leave after I present this. What I would ask of the commission is to take this draft, review it, your chair and I have agreed to put it on next month's agenda. We have time. So any comments or recommended changes, please email them to me, and I can incorporate that into the next report version. I would ask anyone who chaired a committee or an event to look closely at that section, and if you'd like to add more information, please do so. If you have to correct any information, please do so. So I'm asking for some assistance in proofing the information. I would note that Carrie hasn't had a chance to audit the dollars. She will need to do that, so next month, very easily, the next version will have slightly different dollars. I noticed a discrepancy between the Excel spreadsheets that I attached, which I did receive from Carrie, with regard to the hand-in-hand recycle revenue. There's a difference on Carrie's Excel spreadsheet versus what Conrad reported. So I'll make sure those two touch base and get that figured out. Otherwise, like I said, email me any thoughts, changes, recommended, and I'll incorporate those into the report. That will hopefully be the final one next month.
So you have another homework assignment to go ahead and reread the draft report and come back with comments at the next meeting.
I apologize for having to leave, Commissioner Nelson. Thanks.
And so, let's see, the next item is the added item of new business on the household hazardous waste update. Mark?
I attended the quarterly county.
You're on mute.
I attended the quarterly household hazardous waste meeting today at the Ada County landfill, and the takeaways for me that I thought were interesting were just that there's been some restructuring in the Ada County landfill as a department. Dave could help me with this. So now Chad Swend is the director or environmental compliance coordinator and reports directly to the county commission. So he's telling us that he's his own department now and not part of another group. Is that true?
Kurt Hunt is the director,
Oh, is he?
and Chad Schwem is.
How does that reporting work?
Yeah. Well, Teresa will, she's more tuned in on this, but Chad, I know Kurt Hunt is the director that reports to the commissioner.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nelson, Kurt Hunt is the director of the Ada County landfill. Chad Schwend is our environmental compliance coordinator. He replaced Ken Wall when he retired earlier this year.
That's what I was gathering. There's a lot of name changes going on.
There's a lot of changes right now.
And then, of course, the one that was, so explain how it, where did it report before, but now they report directly to the commission?
Prior, we were a division of the operations department for Ada County.
Okay.
And effective October 1, we became our own entity yet again. It became cumbersome to have an extra layer between us and the board when we specialize in solid waste and operations does not. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I was just bringing up that there's been a lot of changes in reporting, and they thought it was worth mentioning. And thank you. And then the other was that November 14th is when there's a proposal to Ada County SWAC regarding the weight-based fees. So November 14th, I guess, is when that discussion happens. Is that true?
It is true.
I know that was a discussion last month. I don't know how that impacts us other than they say no fee changes, no dollar amount changes in this first round. And then the only other thing is we kind of tabled a lot of community outreach last year because of all this recycling. So they're hoping in 2019 to kind of resurrect some of that regarding household hazardous waste, and then also spending some reattacking the reuse versus recycle first on the hazardous waste. And so some of the programs we looked at last year, they're going to look at again, like the smart sorting and some other things, and having a kind of a staging store type situation or building up at the landfill for maybe community groups to go to first for cleaning supplies and lots of things. But what the idea is, before we start shipping stuff out of state, is if we can use it in the valley first. And so it sounds like with all these changes in how they report, they're going to free up some resources to spend time on that over the winter. So that was all just an FYI, what's going on over there.
Commissioners, questions of Mark? Thank you for the report. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is just pointing out the next meeting. Uniquely this year, our scheduled meeting is November 28th, which is the Wednesday after Thanksgiving. So we will be able to hold our regular meeting on November 28th. And you've heard we've carried a few items over. As always, if there's some subjects we're neglecting, please mention them to myself or to Andrea. Is there any further business before the commission?
Mr. Chair, did you want to look at the December meeting or look at that next month?
I would go ahead and give the commission a forewarning. The December meeting would be on December 26th, the day after Christmas. I do not know who will be in or out of town that time period, and I do not know at this point whether we need to have the meeting. I would suggest that you maybe get that in mind, and in the November meeting, if we've got all of our business done for the year, we can go ahead and just cancel the December meeting, or if we know we need it and we want to move it up a week or two so that it's out of the Christmas week, that would be appropriate. All those options are available for the December meeting.
Mr. Chair, I know already that I'm traveling that week, so I will not be here on the 26th. I could be available on the 19th if SWAC needed to meet.
And with that, we've concluded all the business that was on our agenda. I do appreciate all that, so I will go ahead and call the meeting adjourned. It is 5:51.